Okay friends, Jason here with the Impreza Subaru. We've got some good news. We've recently went to this Smog place, and this is the fourth one that I went to. And after I changed out my cold air intake, removed the air oil separator, and also my custom catch can. After I've done that, I was able to get my Smog certification here in California. And I'm kind of happy. So we're going to be today putting back in a lot of this stuff. I didn't have to remove my headers, which was really nice. I didn't have to remove the billet power blocks, even though that is like a glaring modification. So I'm kind of surprised that the previous guys didn't do it, but you know, I think by removing the cold air intake, it just makes your car look not as modified, especially in the engine bay. The guy did it, no problem, no questions asked, passed with flying colors. So, you know, here's to another 2 years before I need to take everything back out. But today I'm going to be putting a lot of this stuff back in, you know, because I like it. Let's dive in. This is going to be a short primer on how to install some of these things. I'm going to go through it with you. A lot of people probably already have cold air intakes and they've changed their filter or they've added an air oil separator or a catch can, but provided that I have some time today, I'm just going to do a little bit of this with you just so you guys can know how to do it if you've never done it before. First things first, this thing, you got to know what that is. That's called a MAF sensor, or a mass airflow sensor. And this controls the fueling for most of the engine. It's a sensor that reads how much airflow there is, what the temperature of the air is, among other things. So the first thing you're going to do is remove the clip here. Remember to plug this thing back in after you're done. And then I got to remove this thing and this whole air assembly. To gain access to a lot of this stuff, you'll have to remove this Snorkus air scoop thing. And this, how does this work? Air comes in through here, comes up through here, gets sucked in through here, goes into the air box with a filter inside, gets sucked up past this mass airflow sensor into the intake pipe, into this throttle body here. Remember we talked about this before, that's that baffle box. This is a resonator, and this is called an intake manifold. Right? So that's the path of where the air goes. Okay, once said clips are removed, the ones that were down here, just pull this out. Up and out, right? There you can see the filter in there. Okay, the next step is to remove this screw here. Okay, so this hose clamp is now loose. We're gonna pop these clips and you can get access to the filter now. What this does is you can just pull this tubing off like that. And since this is an accordion joint, you can actually flex this around and this whole box will just come out now. I need 2 hands. Okay, so I have 2 intake boxes. So this is the front of the intake box. You can keep this one if you're going to do this hybrid thing that I'm doing, right? Hybrid cold air intake. The way we do this is, see where the MAF airflow sensor is connected to this OEM box? I need to remove that and then put it over here because this one has it built in. And you can see I've done a pretty rough cut of this tube here so that I can fit some of these silicone fittings around here. We won't be using this OEM one. We're going to be replacing it with this one. So we'll have to take out the mass airflow sensor now. Okay, I've removed the screws here and I'm just going to pull this out now. There's a little seal around here, if you can tell, right around here. And that's important because you want to keep the all the air where it needs to be and not have any air leaks around here. So I'm gonna While this is out, I'm gonna give it a little quick clean with some mass airflow sensor cleaner. So this is the stuff, you can buy this at any auto store. And typically you're gonna spray some of those kind of fine wires there and in here, and you're just gonna douse it and let it dry. That's the most important thing, is to let it dry after. I've doused them up a little bit. You know, it's a solvent, right? So it's just kind of dissolving some of the grime that's on the sensor wires, and this will allow the engine to read your airflow much better. Okay, so I will be using my epoxy filter a little bit later. I just washed it, so that's why it looks all ragged right now, but it looks pretty good on the back there, but it's still wet. I just washed it last night and I haven't dried it yet, so I'm going to be using this OEM filter. The main differences between some of these filters are that they use felt on the back here, whereas some of these aftermarket ones are a little bit more high quality. They use a rubber O-ring seal around the edge. And that keeps the airbox nice and tight. I've experienced in the past, you know, under very, very high throttle, when you when you stab the throttle here and there, if your airbox isn't sealed very well, the air can get behind this felt with the vibration of the airbox, and it'll tell the mass airflow sensor, hey, I'm pulling in way more air. It happens once in a while when you hit the throttle really, really hard and there's a lot of vibration. This thing vibrates against the back of the airbox, and it lets a little bit of air in and then it kind of messes up some of your readings, right? So that's why I do prefer using the filter with a nice rubber seal. Okay, I want to make mention here that after I pulled off this baffle box breather hose, you can see on there's like oil residue, right? That's because when you hit the high RPMs in this little FB20 engine, what happens is some oil will come up from this tube and then it'll run into the intake. And this box here is meant to keep the intake track clean. Okay, so I've pulled this hose out. Don't throw these things away, guys, because you're going to need them later on. If you ever return your intake back to stock, just keep them. They're cut to the exact length that you need. So I just have like a box in my garage that I keep a lot of this stuff. So this hose is out. Now this intake will be easy to take out now. All right, what's next? All right, I've loosened that hose clamp and I just give it a little wiggle and voila, the entire thing comes out. Easy, easy. Okay. So here's this pile of intake stuff. Let's take a look at this thing here. This box here is very interesting because it's pretty big, right? It's like an entirely like a large chamber. And then it feeds into the bottom of the intake there. So there's all these baffles and like galleyways, I believe, inside of this plastic housing. And it just keeps that oil that gets sprayed up from entering the intake track. That being said, I've had some times where when I drive the car pretty hard, when it pulls the air in through here, it will get this throttle body kind of gummy, right? Right now it's not gummy. That's only because I clean it often and I have catch cans to keep the engine from sucking in some of that crankcase ventilation gases, the dirty gases, the ones that are mixed with oil. So while we're here, actually, it's a good time to give this a little bit of spray, right? And that's just to keep the butterfly valve nice and free, easily turning. All right, not a paid advertisement, but here, this is what you use. Use something like this. You can buy this brand or other brands at your auto shops, your auto stores, and all you do is just point that thing back here, close your eyes, spray and pray, let it dry, spray it again, let it dry, and that'll dissolve some of the gross things, if there is any, in your throttle body. All right, a couple of sprays in there. I'm gonna let it drip dry. You can see it kind of drippy stuff over there, but once this is done, then you don't need to deal with this for a while. This is just preventative maintenance. Okay, so now I'm gonna put the air box in, the one that's cut off, with my filter. I'll put this in. Oh, I gotta get the clips. Jeez. Okay, clips back in. Now we're gonna deal with the rest of this stuff. Okay, this is a pretty easy install. You just need to slide this on and then fit this on over here. But first, I need to put that MAP sensor. Okay, now do make sure that it's properly seated on the mount so that there's no air leaks. The number one problem that I've encountered over the many years of using some of this aftermarket stuff is every time I have codes being thrown, problems with my engine, like stuttering and things like that, it always has to do with some sort of vacuum leak. It could be the airbox, like I mentioned earlier, around the filter. It could be one of these hose clamps just improperly positioned so that there's a small air leak here and there. It's going to wreak havoc on your engine sensors and things like that. So make sure when you tighten everything back up, have a good seal around all of the places so that it's an airtight system. So here's a shot of where that mass airflow sensor sits. You can kind of see how the sensor is positioned so that all the air that passes through this pipe passes that sensor. And if that sensor is not clean, or if it's misplaced in the wrong spot, the engine is going to read weird things. So, yep, that's how it works. All right, so I've positioned the air intake the way that it should fit. You got to be very careful now. All of these areas here need to be very well sealed, right? If it's cockeyed a little bit, it's going to have that micro vacuum leak, and that's what you want to avoid. In a previous video, I mentioned that having a cold air intake for certain cars like the FB20D or the 25D, the direct injection models, those cars, the ones that have the direct injection, they don't really take to having a cold air intake very well. That's because some of the sensors are a little bit more sensitive. And in order to, if you want to use one of those, right, one, get the right size pipe. Don't oversize your pipe. Measure your throttle body to make sure that the size of pipe is very similar. If you oversize this pipe, you're going to reduce the velocity of air that goes through here. This sensor is going to read something different, and it's going to be weird. The other thing to take note of is vibration. So when you're running this engine really hard in the higher RPMs, this whole engine bay is going to be shaking. And what happens is this sensor is sensitive to vibration. So if you have a little bit of silicone or rubber or something, that's why this whole thing can kind of move, right? And the more dampening you have here, that's why the accordion joint over here is a good thing, right? It reduces the amount of vibration. So if you can keep these things kind of loose, not loose, but just able to flex. See how this thing flexes a little bit? That'll give your sensor a little bit of dampening so that it doesn't read, all weird. So I'm going to loosen this up. Behind here, so if I slam it all the way in so that this metal pipe is butted against the throttle body and the engine's vibrating, the vibration is going to transmit through the entire pipe into that sensor, right? So what you can do is pull this off just a little bit, right? Leave a little bit of a gap in between here and just have the silicone be that dampening. That'll help. That'll go a long way to keeping that sensor from reading some weird things. So a little bit of dampening in here. Okay, so are we done? No, we still need to add some of that emission stuff. There's that bung that I was talking about here. That's gonna run all the way down to that hose fitting right there. Before I forget, I'm gonna reclip this thing so that it's good. Hey, welcome to my backyard again. This thing is a bracket that I just painted. Is it sticky? It's good. We're gonna put this back in to hold our catch can. Remember, that hose that comes from that breather port that goes up here, you could just use a regular hose here for your aftermarket one, but what's gonna happen is that when you run the car in high RPMs, this port here is gonna spit out oil vapors, right? Those oil vapors typically will go right back into that intake bung and then pull in through past the throttle body and then into your intake manifold and then burned, right? But along the way, if it doesn't get filtered, what happens is your throttle body is going to get really, really gummy, especially if you run in those high RPMs, right? So that's why I'm going to be adding my catch can here. I think typically if you buy an aftermarket intake, they don't even provide any sort of, they might even not even supply the hose for you. But, you know, just be aware of that. If you're doing this aftermarket stuff, you need to have that bung attached to the crankcase ventilation breather port. That's part of emissions. And then if you are a little bit extra and you want to keep your throttle body clean, you add the catch can between here and here. The other really important thing here is that this breather needs to be a very, very direct route here. I used to have it come all the way out here, loop back, and then come up here. It was really long, and it's not efficient when the route is really long. So make sure that if you do have one, it's very direct, very similar to the OEM length. Okay, so you can see this hose comes down and into down there. Make sure you tighten up those hose clamps real good so that you don't have any air leaks. So now that that's all installed, I have one more thing that I need to add, and that is the Crawford air oil separator. Where does this go? Where does it go? It goes onto something called the engine's PCV system. It's a positive crankcase ventilation. So there's a hose here that goes into the intake manifold, and then there's a hose down there that goes to the engine block. Okay, so this thing is going to go over here, and I'm going to connect those hoses back to where they're supposed to go. So if you really wanted to, at this point, that valve there, PCV valve, positive crankcase ventilation valve, can be removed right now with a 19mm socket and sprayed with that throttle body cleaner that I was talking about, that solvent. Make sure you shake it out, make sure it rattles. Once it's rattling, you know that it's freely moving, so the valve is, you know, unblocked. And that's another piece of preventative maintenance that you can do while you're, you know, installing your air oil separator. So now the air oil separator has been installed. The hoses are connected. I have my catch can breather connected. I have my cold air intake connected. The last thing to do now is install the snorkus. Voila! It's done. So the car's running now. You're gonna want to give your car a good shakedown just to make sure that all of those tubes and hoses and fittings are all nice and sealed. I typically go for a normal drive, and then once I know that everything's sort of working, I'll blast it, you know, into the high RPMs, get it shaking, the engine shaking up real good, force a lot of air through those intake pipes, through all those hoses. Once you know it's good, it's good. But if you do get some of that engine stuttering or it's throwing codes, double check all of your fittings and make sure those hoses and tubes are all tightened up real good with no air leaks. So that's it. I'm gonna go for my shakedown right now.